Good evening. Thank you for joining us to learn more about the University of Queensland School of Medicine, Ochsner Clinical School. This is Whitney Bennett, and I'm joined by Dr. Thea Volpe. And very exciting news that we have joining us this evening Dr. Emily Sinoway, who is in our first graduating class and who's starting her residency this summer. So I am going to speak about the school, the curriculum, give you the highlights about this unique, excellent global medical school education opportunity, and then you'll have a chance to hear a lot directly from Dr. Sinoway. In particular, people interested to hear about the match, the 2013 match, and where our students will be going. And so we do have that information for you. So the first images you can see here are our campuses. The top one is St. Lucia, the campus in Brisbane, the main campus. In the middle you can see our Ipswich campus. Dr. Sinoway actually attended classes at the St. Lucia campus on top there when she was in Brisbane. And then the bottom image is of Ochsner Clinical School in New Orleans, Louisiana. Brisbane, as you can see, is a lovely city, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, and you'll get to hear about Dr. Sinoway's transition when she went over for those first 2 years in Australia. It's a beautiful campus. University of Queensland is a very prominent institution in Australia. As you can see, it was founded in 1909. It's a large university, the prominent contingent of international students. As you can see, a large percentage of the student body is international. And this is the medical school building, one of the buildings. So the School of Medicine itself was founded a few years after the university. Australia obviously is large, and there aren't a lot of medical schools like there are here in the U.S. So I know it can be stunning for American students to see that 550 students enroll annually. But in fact, because your education is predominantly through problem-based learning groups of 10 to 12, which again, Dr. Sinoway will speak about from her direct experience in those, you don't feel at all lost in a large school. Within those 550 students that begin annually, up to 120 are the UQ Ochsner students, another 130 from around the world, and then about 300 Australian students. It's a very research-intensive university. One of among many advancements that have come out of research led by the University of Queensland was the development of Gardasil. They also have a medical society, which is an independent organization, very, very vibrant and active in the medical society. And in fact, the University of Queensland Ochsner students have representation in this society and have their own branch as well. And this is one of the front of the buildings of the clinical school and part of the Ochsner Health System in New Orleans. Ochsner, for those of you who aren't from the South, might not have heard of it, but in fact it's a very well-established academic medical center. Ochsner Clinic was founded in 1946 by Tulane breakaway physician Alton Ochsner, and he, as you can see, was the first who actually linked cigarette smoking with lung cancer. Another highlight of advancements at Ochsner is that it is a leader and has been since the 60s in organ transplants. It's a large health system, which is great for you as future medical students because it affords the opportunity for numerous patient contacts during your training, as well as in a variety of settings. And again, Dr. Sinoway will speak to this. So whether you're interested in urban environment for your training or you're interested in rural and remote care, which Dr. Sinoway had some experience in, I believe, there are multiple opportunities for the contexts of your clinical training. 325 residency and fellowship positions at Ochsner, and it has been a teaching site for third and fourth year rotations for Tulane and LSU students since the 40s. So very similar, and I think one of the reasons why this has been such a successful pairing and model is that the program is similar to the experience you would have at a U.S. medical school, including very strong preparation for the USMLEs, and it's preparing you for practice in the U.S., but you also get this global advantage which sets you apart from other physicians and will give you a competitive edge when you apply for residency. The model is then the first 2 years in Australia, followed by your third and fourth year rotations in the U.S. And as I just mentioned, our graduates are differentiated because of this very broad and deep experience they have at a medical school with an international focus. So really drawing from the global and then being able to take it and use it for the various more local settings that you'll be practicing in. The MBBS is the equivalent of the MD. Again, unique aspects of the program are having clinical experience during and at the end of that first year that you're in Australia, and then having a capstone experience where one of your rotations during your fourth year is done in Australia. So to really bring the global aspect of your training full circle. You are, in these problem-based learning groups, as well as all your classes, completely integrated with the Australian and the other international students, which again, those academic differences and perspectives that those students bring will help expand and develop your understanding of medicine. And you're able to share what you bring from your pre-med work here in the U.S. to share with those students. Because of where Australia is located, fall is January, so the academic school year is January through November. So the problem-based learning groups, clinical coaching sessions, lectures, labs, tutorials, very importantly, USMLE preparation beginning in year one, so that by end of year two, before you start your rotations in New Orleans, you're prepared to sit for the USMLE. And we will share our student results with you a little bit later in the presentation. And also important, because University of Queensland has been serving international students for decades, they're very well prepared to receive you. And so just more broadly within the university, in terms of student services geared towards international students, there's a special department. And also within the School of Medicine for the UQ Ochsner cohort, there are dedicated advisors to support you during those 2 years that you're over in Brisbane. And then the traditional third and fourth year rotations at Ochsner. And the way the school year runs, because you finish in December, what's nice is that you're beginning your residency interviews just before you're graduating, and then in fact have off 6 months in between finishing medical school and starting your residency. Some specifics about the USMLE support program, which was developed specifically for UQ Ochsner by a former U.S. medical school dean, so recognizing that our students specifically are going to Australia for the global experience, but will be taking the USMLE and will be looking towards strong results to be competitive for their residency programs. So you start week one, year one, getting ready for that step one, which again you take at the end of year two. So this goes into a little bit about the texts that are used. And what's interesting about step two is because you actually will have had more clinical rotations because of the way the calendar is, that can be seen as an advantage for you prior to taking Step 2. A very robust residency advising program. And again, Dr. Sinaway will be able to comment on what she took advantage of that's offered through the program that they have set up at the clinical school in New Orleans. But individualized counseling, you'll hear med students say every single rotation they're in, they think that's the one that they're going to want to go into for their residency. And so helping people zero in with their interests and skills on which residency makes sense for them. And they have fairs and other opportunities to help inform that decision, and then mock interviews to help get ready for the residency interviews. When you're in both Australia and New Orleans, there are many research opportunities, and that is something that more and more we are getting feedback that when students apply to residency, if you have had some kind of research experience while in medical school, that really does strengthen your residency application. And both University of Queensland and Ochsner are strong in these areas. As you can see, a lot of outside research, financial support. There is a summer scholarship opportunity between years 1 and 2 that's very competitive, but that UQ Ochsner students, as full University of Queensland students, can apply for. There are also opportunities, like there are in undergrad, to work in lab positions. And there is a fantastic medical student leadership program that is done in partnership between the School of Medicine and the business school that is competitive, but a number of the UQ Ochsner students have won positions in. So as I've said, this is a very rigorous, excellent medical school, and the placement you can see here in the U.S. News, University of Queensland is ranked in the area of biomedical and life sciences in good company with our strongest programs here in the U.S. You can see Penn, UCSF, Hopkins, Chicago, WashU. So just to give you, for those of you, again, not familiar with the caliber of the academic ranking of the University of Queensland, this gives you an idea, and you certainly can drill down yourself and do more research in that area. Obviously, it's going to be important to you in your clinical training, not only in Australia, but at New Orleans, at Ochsner, to be in a training place where you're really learning the best practices in clinical care. And Ochsner offers you that. As you can see from its work with the Tulane and LSU students, it is one of the top 15 teaching hospitals in the U.S. And again, unless you're from the South, you might not have been aware. It can be called the Mayo Clinic or the Cleveland Clinic of the South. It's an excellent academic medical center. Excellence in patient care, highly ranked in 11 specialties across the spectrum. And again, if you go to Ochsner's website, you could see what those particular specialties are, and very strong presence in the New Orleans community, #1 hospital there in Louisiana and in New Orleans. And this is an accolade we're very proud of, that the AMA featured and recognized the University of Queensland Ochsner Medical School is actually in the vanguard of this move in medical school education to include in the education process clinical rotations or training opportunities abroad. And so UQ Ochsner, again, is on the forefront of doing this and recognized as leading the way in this area by the AMA. So back to the USMLE support and how did it prepare our students for the steps. And as you can see, the students put in their hard work, and they have done very, very well. And it's quite different in terms of opportunities for a more global, international focus, but with very strong academic preparation offers an excellent opportunity. And you won't have any disadvantage when you go to take the USMLE. So the exciting news, our first graduating class had 100% residency match, and you can see OBGYN, physical medicine and rehab, internal medicine, family pathology, and general surgery. So even within a small group, quite a range of specialties, which was very exciting for us to see. So to talk a little bit about the composition of the students in the UQ Ochsner cohort, so again, this 120 students within the larger 550 that enter UQ, University of Queensland, every year, our own cohort is quite international and diverse. So although you must be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident of the U.S. to take advantage of the UQ Ochsner option, within our group, we have this past year, we have the examples of the actual country of birth for some of our students that was outside the U.S. So we have quite the global representation even within our own cohort. And again, this past year, when we looked at what were the top 5 states represented in the class that matriculated in January, California, New York, Louisiana, Virginia, and Texas for states, and then again this past year, entering in 2013, Columbia, NYU, Tulane, LSU, UCLA, UCSD, and Villanova. And this changes from year to year. Last year, I think the top of our feeder schools happened to be Cornell. So again, this is a snapshot of students who matriculated in January 2013. And here are their stats, pretty self-explanatory. We have been in the past 50-50 male and female. I'm not sure what happened this year, why we have 62% male, but the previous few years was 50-50, which mirrors composition in U.S. med schools. So this gives you a little visual on what our students do outside of the hospital floors in New Orleans, and you can see we have a clinic that we partner with in Haiti, which Dr. Sinaway has been to and can answer your questions about or expound on when she speaks. Habitat for Humanity there in New Orleans, and then participating in a health fair at Bonnabel High School. So lots of wonderful opportunities to get involved in the greater community, both in New Orleans and in Brisbane and Ipswich. And again, Dr. Sinaway was involved in some activities, I believe, in Australia and can speak to those clubs that she was in. And they have a very active student organization. So as I said, there's the larger independent, which is important because it's separate from the school, so the students run it and get to do what they want. That's the UQ Medical Society. Then there is also this adjunct, so to speak, group, the Ochsner Medical Student Association, who's been very active towards contributing to student life as well as community life in Brisbane and in New Orleans. So they were really instrumental in getting this opportunity to happen for the UQ Ochsner students to go to Haiti, as well as creating a handbook, which is not too hard to survive in Brisbane. It's a very wonderful, safe, clean, easygoing city. But the students did design a handbook that helps guide one through the transition from the U.S. to Australia, so that you can get that done easily and then get about your business of being in medical school. So they have this arrival guide. And so again, back to residency, because we know from speaking with applicants to the school that this is really one of your biggest concerns. And of course, you want to have options and you want to be competitive for residency and ultimately practice medicine in the U.S. And again, we really believe, Thea and I, both from having spent a lot of time with pre-meds and inside med schools here in the U.S., that the UQ Ochsner opportunity is phenomenal. The global academic medical experience at highly ranked UQ and highly ranked Ochsner as an academic medical center. Thoughtful USMLE preparation, so as long as you do your part and are consistent in preparing, you are given the resources to do very well on the USMLE. And from feedback, when we chat with residency directors here in the U.S., they are clear in expressing to us that this UQ Ochsner training offers the graduates an advantage over the U.S. students who go straight through undergrad here, straight through med school here, and don't have a kind of depth and breadth and stretch to their experience that the UQ Ochsner students bring. So admissions, real quick, you have to have a terminal degree awarded within 10 years, a B average, 888 on the MCAT. There are some slight exceptions that are made to that, and if you're close on that, you can email me and I can go over with you some exceptions that have been made in the past and to perhaps explore with you if you could fit into one of those exceptions. U.S. financial aid, so what does that mean? It means that the University of Queensland is recognized by the U.S. Department of Education. So for those of you who are familiar with FAFSA, just like you would scroll down and find Seattle University on FAFSA, you will find University of Queensland. On the landing page on our website, you'll see when we have open houses coming up in New Orleans, which offers the chance to meet faculty and more students, get a tour of the medical school, and speak with the dean. We also have regional information sessions with the dean around the country, and those are on our website, and those are always being added. So if you're sign up for our listserv or you check on our website, you can keep up to date on those options. And as we are tonight, having a webinar with a current student. So my colleague is going to read some questions that are coming in. And Dr. Sinoway, are there any things that you wanted to jump on right away before some questions come rolling in that you'd like to comment on?
And I'm sure as the questions start coming, be able to go from there. So why don't we just start with some questions?
Okay, so one student asks if Dr. Sinoway can describe the life transition from the U.S. to Australia. How is it different? How is it the same from what you had expected?
Sure. By the way, being called Dr. Sinoway is very odd because this is the first time, of course, that's happened, so it's funny.
Own it, Dr. Sinoway.
So the life transition, it's, you know, like anything that big, it's going to be an adjustment. I'm from Georgia originally, and I went away to undergrad. I went to Ohio, so, I mean, that was an adjustment in itself, but, you know, moving across the world is definitely a different breed. And for me, I like to tell this story, and I told this during interviews because this program was, you know, so new when we started as the first class, and I applied to UQ. It was my second year of trying to get into school, and so I kind of wanted to broaden my horizons and my scope of looking of where to go. And I found UQ, and then, you know, I was contacted about this program, and I got really excited, thought it sounded perfect, best of both worlds. And the only thing was I hadn't, my mom, my dad, I had applied to school in Australia, so they got a big shock in the middle of December when I told them that not only had I applied, but I was accepted to this program and that I was going to be moving to Australia. My dad was very excited. My mom told me, that's great, but you're not going to go. And I said, I think I'm going to go. So, and we had a quick turnaround time. You know, it was brand new, so we found out, I think most of us in the first class in December, and then we needed to be there by the middle of January, so it was about a month, and we had to get visas and physicals, chest x-ray, all that stuff, set up financial aid, and amazingly it all got done, and I just kind of left. I went on a whim. I thought it sounded like an amazing adventure. I'd always wanted to go to Australia, so it just kind of seemed like an opportune time, and I was ready to get going with school. I was ready to, you know, start the next chapter of my life. And I got there January. It was miserably hot, but, still fun and exciting. And I was very fortunate in my case that they have a meeting. I will preface, the things I say with, I did just graduate, so a lot of what you encounter as new students could very well be different from, what I experienced, and I'm sure things have changed. So I will preface my answers, with that. But when I went, I'm sure they still do. UQ has a session to help you find housing and kind of get your bearings in a new country. Like Whitney was saying, they're very adept at dealing with international students. They do all the time. So they're very, help you with resources and everything. So I just happened to be fortunate to sit down next to Katie, who was the other girl in my class, at this meeting on how to find housing. And she said, hello, and just, we started talking and found out she was in the same program. And within about 2 minutes of meeting each other, we, said, do you want to live together? You want a roommate? And it kind of took off from there. Sorry to ramble on, but I would say just she was probably a lifesaver for me, having gone to a new place without knowing anyone. For those of you going in, now that the class is so large, I think it would be really helpful for you. I'm sure Whitney and Thea can help you maybe contact other students that are coming in, just to kind of know somebody when you get over there, and kind of have a partner in crime to go through, the beginning stages with, and the culture shock, and just to kind of have somebody that's there going through the same thing that you can have to lean on and just experience everything with. Because I know for me that was a big thing. I don't know if...
Well, I was going to say, Dr. Sinaway, sorry to interrupt, but now I know what's different is there's a Facebook page that's closed that only the accepted students are able to log in, and the current students have mentors that they assign. They try to do by region and school affiliation. So you can, like you said, get those partners in crime or make those connections even in the U.S. before you get over for orientation.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think that's huge, because it's very helpful to know, because when you're moving to a new place, like, you can look online and do as much research as you want about where to live and what it's going to be like, but it's not until you get there when you really get a feel for it and know what you're in for. So having somebody to kind of go through it with you, I think is a huge deal. But I mean, as far as other stuff, culture-wise, there's definitely little things, but they speak English, and they, do most of the same things we do. So you'll laugh at some stuff. And but I actually met my husband over there, so he's Australian, and so I'm still, learning things all the time, stuff he says, and I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. So, but it's really fun, and you guys, if you choose, to go with this program, you'll have the best time.
Okay, thanks. So if you could comment on the academic experience during years 1 and 2. Thea and I definitely got that question a lot. I think applicants are interested to know, how does it feel different than, say, sitting in a class at The Ohio State University?
Yeah, well, I did go to Ohio State, which is a large school here in the U.S., so, going to UQ and having such a large class probably wasn't as big of a shock as it is to maybe some people, because I think our class in total was a little over 400, so, lectures and everything can be quite large. But it's still, I think you touched on it earlier, like you said, it doesn't feel that large. You don't feel lost in the crowd. And in the first year, it is a lot of, book study and self-directed learning, as they like to say. It definitely is a lot on the student to, kind of motivate yourself, and you have lectures and labs and the PBL sessions, and then it's kind of up to you to go home and say, okay, this is kind of what we've covered this week, so this is what I'm going to read about, and this is what I'm going to learn on my own. And definitely for the UQ Oxnard students, in terms of the USMLE, it's even more important. And hindsight is absolutely 20/20. And being in our position, I think it would have been very helpful to have someone like me tell students like you, when you start in Australia, like hit the ground running, have fun and enjoy, being in Australia and enjoy your classmates. But keep your eye on the prize, absolutely, because a lot of it will be up to you to kind of keep yourself on track, definitely with USMLE. I think that's a big goal. And the earlier you start, studying and doing questions and just preparing yourself, the better, the more prepared you're going to be. So, my experience in the first 2 years was phenomenal. I thought I got a great education. PBLs were fun. I definitely think they're, a useful tool and a good way to learn. You certainly helps you make friends. You're in a group of 10 to 12 people who you spend 6 or so hours a week with, so you get to know each other very well, and hopefully you end up in a group that you really like and mesh well with, and then you make some friends. So my first 2 years were great, but definitely keep in mind that as a student it is partly your job to self-motivate and self-direct your study and keep up on your reading.
Thanks. And from those experiences that you talk about during the first 2 years, in hindsight, what do you see you really did help you with your residency interviews or applications? So if you think about what you took with you from those first 2 years, maybe both from the PBL, how that helped you in the clinics, in rotations, but then also when you applied for your residency.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think the first 2 years, and again, things could have changed, but I know in the second year you start like clinical coaching, where you do have more experience in the hospitals, and you're attached to an attending who takes you around, and you do in a group of 5 or so students, and you take turns doing exams on patients. And then with the first year elective, you really get more clinical experience than I think maybe some students in the States are exposed to. And so I think that certainly helps. When you come back to New Orleans in years 3 and 4, I found that maybe we were a little bit more comfortable in terms of approaching patients in the hospital and, taking histories and doing exams and things like that, just because maybe we were a little more comfortable in that setting. So I think, that definitely helped in that sense. I feel like just, having gone to Australia, that experience in itself, in terms of applications and interviews, although we are technically foreign medical graduates, I think that experience in itself kind of speaks to the applicant's ability to, take on new things and experience challenge, living in a new country and, broadening your scope of medical education. So I think it's intriguing to, at least what I found, I found more on my interviews of, the interviewers asking, well, that sounds really interesting, like, what made you do that, more than questioning, like, well, do you think you got a good education? Or, it was more like, wow, that sounds interesting. So there was more intrigue, I think, having that experience and doing that. So yeah, in terms of your application, and then obviously what you do while you're over there. I didn't personally take part in much research or anything like that. I did participate in some of the clubs, Trophic, one of the rural clubs, and did a rural trip, which was awesome. And
Where did you go for that?
oh gosh, where did we go? Now I'm not even gonna be able to remember.
It was in the Outback?
Oh, no, we didn't. We didn't go to the Outback. We went to. I'm not gonna be able to remember the name on the spot.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, that's okay. That's okay. It was just it was actually funny because I went with a group of friends to Fraser Island. We did a trip and stayed at this hostel where you get the cars from to go to the island. And so on the Trophic trip, that's actually the same hostel we stayed at. It was a very small, remote rural town, but we toured a couple of rural hospitals and went to see like the flying doctors, and so it was very neat. And so I did some of that stuff in the first 2 years. I know people that have done research and, really enjoyed it. And so, stuff you get involved in. I coached gymnastics when I was over there and, put that on my application to show I kind of got involved and, doing something over there outside of medicine. And so there's different things you can do, and just to show how, what sort of life experience you've had outside of just, being a medical student.
That's great. And then another question that we have is someone asks, how supportive are the professors? And I know you mentioned that self-directed learning is really important in medical school, but did you want to comment on anything else in that regard?
Sure. I know from personal experience, they are very supportive. There was one professor in particular who I haven't contacted in a while, and I probably should. His name's Salim, and I think he's still with the school, but he actually, after our first set of exams in our first year, if you were having difficulty or, just if you kind of wanted to talk with him and go over material or whatever, he, was so available and, would see you basically anytime and just talk about whatever you needed to talk about. I think there were a few instances where Katie and I both ended up crying in his office, and he would just, he was very understanding, was just like, you're doing fine, it's all good. And so from my personal experience, they're, very approachable, and I know that other professors are the same. There's probably been some turnover, since I was there, and some new people, but, I saw students, going up to lecturers all the time before, after class, and a lot of them, in their presentations will say, if you have a question, if you need help, like, here's my email, here's my contact info. And I think with research that a lot of lecturers and professors are doing research as well, and they'll tell you, if you're interested, just contact me. So I would say that they are very approachable and very understanding. And if, it's kind of up to the student just, to take that initiative and say, hey, I'm having some trouble, or I'd really like to ask you a question. So, yeah.
Yeah, so it sounds similar to here.
Yeah, very, very much so.
Great. And then someone would like to know what specialty you're going into, and if you want to talk about how you arrived at that decision to pursue that particular specialty.
Sure. I'm going into physical medicine and rehabilitation. It's a very, let's say, not very well-known specialty. Well, before I started med school, I was living at home, and I worked in an inpatient rehab unit where I'm from, and I just really enjoyed it. Then when I started school, I, kind of developed a love of old people, which might be kind of weird, but then I kind of started leaning towards geriatrics, and, just the more I experienced and the farther in school I got, I learned more about the PM&R field and discovered that, it really incorporates a lot of the aspects of medicine that I'm very interested in. There's a sports medicine component, and I did gymnastics growing up, so I'm very interested in sports medicine. You you do have a lot of interaction with the elderly population. And I just really love the rehab field, stroke patients and TBI patients and all that. So yeah, and then in my 4th year, I did a number of rotations in rehab. I did a couple, or I did one during my medical specialties rotation, and then my medicine and society, there's a stream that's rehab and palliative care. So I did that again, and then as part of my elective, I rotated at Emory for a month in their PM&R department, and then I also did a month with an Ochsner doctor who is a pediatric PM&R doc. He is, I think he said, the only pediatric PM&R doctor in all the states of Louisiana and Mississippi combined, and I absolutely just loved every minute I spent with him. So as much as I love old people, I am now kind of leaning towards the pediatric PM&R field, which unfortunately is an extra 2-year fellowship after I'm finished. But yeah, we'll see what happens. That's kind of my story.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Someone asks to talk about what the anatomy lab and dissection situation is there in Australia.
Well, I know when I was there, they are anatomy sessions. I think they were once a week. I can't remember exactly. You don't have your own cadaver that you share and dissect, but they do have kind of, I guess you would say, cadaver parts. So, and it kind of goes based on what you're learning, for that block. So if you're on, cardiac, you'll be, studying the heart or things like that. So when you go to anatomy, you'll have sort of that portion of the cadaver to be able to study. And then there are tutors, so, it'll be a group of students and then with a tutor and then kind of that section of the cadaver, and they'll go over everything with you. There were, some times where they would be doing dissection in the lab when we were there, so you could observe. But for the most part, you're just kind of looking at, different body parts based on what you're learning at the time. They did have, x-rays and different images and doctors that would kind of review that with you during, different sessions. It just kind of depended on what you were doing. And I do think they have a competition, a dissection competition every year that you can, try to enter, and they'll give you, it'll be an arm or something, and you can dissect that to try to win a prize or something. And then they also have an anatomy lab upstairs of where, the dissection and everything used to take place, where you could go anytime. I think it was anytime, and to just kind of look around, and they would have, different models and things you could look at.
Okay, thank you. And could you elaborate on the experience at the clinic in Haiti and maybe talk a little bit about what the setup of that clinic is?
Sure. So we were the first group to go. So, I'm sure any group that comes after us, their experience will be different. But we, the goal of our trip was kind of just to get a sense of what that trip for students in the future might entail, and the possibilities, and just kind of what that experience would be all about, learning about medicine in a third world country and everything. So we arrived. We were there for a week. We arrived and took a very extensive road trip up to this very small town called Mabin Crochu, where we spent, I think it was about 3 days. I think the original plan was for us to spend the whole week there, but after a couple of days, Dr. Laborde, he's Haitian, and he kind of runs the organization that brought us over there thought it might be a little bit better for us to just kind of experience Haiti as a whole and really get a feel for what that culture and, you know, what it's all about over there. So, but we did spend 3 days in this town. We saw their hospital, which is very small. The pediatrics ward was essentially a room with 3 cribs and, you know, obviously no air conditioning, nothing like that. So we did see patients in the clinic they had attached to the hospital, 2 rooms, you know, with very, very limited resources. But it was certainly a great experience. And I mean, you see patients with, you know, diseases, malaria, and, you know, things that you're not really ever going to see over here. So it's definitely eye-opening. And then there's another town near there where Dr. Laborde has established, you know, a school for this community, and I think his goal is to eventually build a clinic where he's built this school, and then his dream, I think, is that clinic would serve as where future students of the UQ Oxnard cohort could go during their medicine and society rotation and participate in, you know, a 4 or 6 week, however long rotation over there, spending time at this clinic and, you know, seeing patients and really becoming invested in the community and learning from the population, because that's, you know, what medicine and society is all about. So that's, you know, his goal. So we spent some time in that community and then, you know, just traveled around learning and, you know, really seeing what Haiti was all about. So it was awesome.
Yeah, sounds like an amazing experience. The last thing, if you could comment on, you talked about really how you took advantage of physicians and faculty at the clinical school in New Orleans, and I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the hospital experience there in general, as well as just a little bit of about New Orleans itself for all the non-Southerners out there listening in and thinking about going to the school.
Sure. Well, I'm from Georgia, so, you know, for me, I got to Australia and I thought that was hot and humid, and then I got to New Orleans and really learned what hot and humid was all about. But it's an adventure, and it is certainly a learning experience and one that I'll never forget. I think that transition from Australia back to New Orleans, you know, you're coming back home and it's exciting, but it's also, you know, kind of a challenging time. You're, you know, moving your life back from across the world and at the same time trying to get your bearings and start this new chapter in school. So, you know, it took a little while, I think, for us to finally settle in and get used to being in New Orleans, but our 2 years there were just, you know, unforgettable, and it really is an amazing city. It's unlike anywhere I have ever traveled to or lived in within the United States. So if you're ready for just a little bit of, you know, some culture shock even here in your own country, then you'll be fine. There's amazing things to do and see and just experience there. We lived in Uptown, just for those people who were wondering, you know, where to live. And I will just mention, in Brisbane, I lived in the West End my first year, and then South Bank my second year. And so those are 2, I think, you know, phenomenal areas to live. And then in New Orleans, I lived in Uptown with a few other people, which is also, you know, a great place to live. From personal, and I think, you know, from my close friends in my class, our clinical experience in Oxnard was absolutely phenomenal. I think it's unique to have all of your rotations to, you know, kind of take place in one institution. I know rotating with, some Tulane and LSU students, you can kind of go from place to place and, do your OB/GYN rotation here and then go somewhere else for medicine. But, for us, it was kind of all in one central spot, and it was just awesome because, we came in and, the medical interns, were interns. And then by the time we left, they were in their third year, almost ready to be done. So it was just so cool to kind of see them for those years and just really develop, some close relationships with some of the docs, not just Dr. Swanee and Pinsky and Dykeman and, the advisors there, but also, some of the residents and some of the attendings that, you really get to interact with closely. And then I'll just touch on, rotating with the Tulane and LSU students was awesome. I mean, they're, medical students just like you, and studying abroad and then coming home, at least I was kind of nervous, like, am I going to know anything? Am I going to know as much as they do? Like, are they going to be way superior? And, it's not the case. They're basically just like you, and, so and for the most part, really awesome people. And so, you make some friends and just learn from each other. And then, for me personally, I touched on, that I rotated with a doc. He's on the North Shore, actually, a pediatric PM&R doctor. And, it was such a phenomenal experience. And I think, you make these connections. And he went to school, at this program in Cincinnati where they have a combined pediatric PM&R program. I won't bore you all with the details, but, they accept like one person a year. And, I applied there just kind of on a whim with a letter of recommendation from him. And I got an interview there. I'd never in a million years expected to even like get an interview there. And so it just kind of goes to show you, these connections you make and people you meet, like almost anything, it's kind of who you know. And I think Oxnard, they have a lot of people like that who can, help you out, and, they know people who know people. And so, you just got to utilize your resources. And, I think for our group, it was a very personal experience in that there weren't very many of us. Our group was so small, but the administrators, they did all they could to help us through residency applications and the match process, and held informative sessions and mock interviews, and they do everything they can to help you through it. And they're always available if you have questions or need help. And especially the student coordinators, Charlotte and Scott and Melissa, they're phenomenal, and they save your life like on a daily basis and help you through everything. So there's some really, really great people at Oxnard to help you.
That's great. Well, Emily, I want to thank you, or Dr. Sinoway, thank you so much for your time this evening, and I hope you enjoy these last few months before you start your residency.
Me too. I don't know if I'm going to want to go to work after this. I guess I'll be ready.
Yeah. All right. Good night. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this webinar. Good night.